Season 2, Episode 10. The Students. 3 days later, Percival rang back.
"Well, that's been an education," he said. "Turns out our Paddy did have legal cover, up to £2 million. It was on the house insurance policy, like you said. I got put through to a lawyer who happened to be a history nut. He was mad keen on this whole Cumbrian king thing. He was a bit upset, actually, when the LRRC caved in after one faxed threatening letter. He's going to come to the fell race, and I have to promise to show him around."
"You mean the race is on then?" said JB.
"That's right," said Percival. 11 LRRC races, and our one little race wedged in between 3 months from now. If Paddy comes in the top 2, he will qualify for nationals, as he's managed to build up so many points already this year."
"Oh, that's brilliant," said JB.
"Yes, thanks again for the idea," he said. "It's the first time the LRRC have been stopped from doing anything. Might be a turning point. Well, let's hope anyway. Right, well, best be off. Training tonight. Good luck with yours."
Yeah," said JB. "And you?" JB rang Camo to tell him the good news.
"Oh, that's great," he said. "Caw, to think you've got the Pinkney's phone number on your phone."
"Should I put it on your phone too?" said JB.
"Ooh, better not," said Camo. "I might come out to the pub one night at 1 in the morning, a bit tipsy, and not be able to resist giving Paddy Pinkney a ring to ask for some fell running tips."
"Pauline might answer," said JB.
"Oh, good God," said Camo. "Can you imagine? Wife would kill me."
"And our Kayla," said JB.
"Oh, Lord," said Camo.
JB picked Camo up in his car before the club meeting.
"Cheers for this, JB," he said. "So this is it then. We'll see if any of these new members turn up, and if the club's still running or not. I felt great last week with everyone there. But what if they don't turn up? We're back to square one again."
"Well, I've had a text from Derek saying he's coming, and one from Wilson, from the students, saying he's coming, and there's 4 of them.
"Students," said Camo.
"What's wrong with students?" said JB. He sounds mad keen, actually.
"Squaddies and students are natural enemies, JB. Always have been and always will be. I thought everyone knew that," said Camo.
"No," laughed JB. "Why's that?"
"Well," said Camo seriously, "us squaddies, we put our lives on the line while they sit around smoking drugs, getting drunk and talking about how they hate the country that we're defending, and how everything would be perfect if only it was communist and they took away everyone else's money and they were the ones in charge. All they have to do while we are out 24/7 in the freezing cold, the wind and the rain is occasionally write an essay, which is always late, and the more hate and communism they put in the essay, the higher marks they get. And when they finally get finished with uni, and they have to start paying their own way, they go get a high-paid job they know nothing about, and they're put in charge of people who do know what they're doing, but they don't have one of the crappy, useless sociology degrees. And when they get a load of money and a big house and a big car, well, suddenly they're not so communist no more, are they? Then they're all for the status quo like then, except for whinging about having to pay the taxes. Then their sole aim in life is to make sure that their kids get the same degrees they had from the same places so they can have the same cussy jobs too. And all us squaddies see is another turn of the bloody wheel."
"Crikey, Camo," said JB. "You've thought that one through."
"Seen it with my own eyes. Don't need to think it through, he said. Ho, 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 ho.
Camo laughed at a memory.
When we were army training, we had a local pub we all went to, a squaddie pub like. It was just up the road from a student dive bar, and when we'd had a skinful, we'd sometimes go down and mess with them a bit. Sometimes we'd beat up a few, if they got a bit cheeky like. But to be honest, I felt sorry for 'em. All scrawny, pasty and smelly. No fighting 'em. Mind you, some of the lasses were quite tasty when they made an effort. Some of 'em turned their noses up all snooty like, but some took a shine to us. Not surprising really, what with our bulging muscles compared to these namby-pamby wet lettuce types they were used to.
Well, try not to beat any of these four up, smiled JB. We need the members, even if they are only here for the summer. It'll help see us through.
I'll try not to,
said Camo doubtfully. They arrived, and there was already someone waiting outside.
It's young Thomas, said JB. He came back.
Oh, that's good. He's a bit sensitive, Camo, so might be an idea to tread a bit carefully until he's settled in a bit more like. Camo looked at him confused.
I always tread carefully, he said. As carefully as you can in size 14 feet.
They got out of the car. Thomas looked like he could not make his mind up about enthusiastically going in or turning round and going back home. Hi, Thomas, said JB. Had a good couple of weeks? All right, said Thomas noncommittally.
So, are you any good at running then, or what?
Said Camo. I'm okay, he said.
Come on then,
said Camo.
Let's see what you've got. I'll race you up to the end of the street, round that far lamp post and back.
Okay then, said Thomas. Camo readied himself.
You say go, JB,
said Camo, looking competitive and serious. JB shook his head. So much for treating him with kid gloves, he thought. All right, you two. On your marks. Get set. Go! Camo and Thomas shot off up the street, Thomas easily moving ahead. After Thomas had turned at the top round the lamppost, he saw Camo had turned early.
Hey, that's cheating,
said Thomas.
You're supposed to go round the lamppost.
I said to the lamppost,
said Camo.
You must have misheard me.
Thomas easily beat Camo back. He stood there controlling his breathing like it had been nothing. Camo came running back, breathing hard.
You're fast, I'll give you that, said Camo. But how good are you on the fells?
I've not done any fells yet,
said Thomas.
Ah, well, fells are different, aren't they, JB?
said Camo.
I'll reel you in on them, young fella.
Thomas shrugged, like he was just happy to find out. Camo gave JB a wink and a smile when Thomas could not see. Right, said JB, opening the door. Let's get that kettle on. Cup of tea, Thomas? Okay, he said.
Are you making it then?
said Camo to Thomas. He looked surprised.
I don't know how,
he said.
I've never made tea or coffee.
Never made tea or coffee?
said Camo, teasing him. Come on, I'll show you how, said JB. Then you can take a turn at making it. Okay, he said. Derek had arrived, and the four of them were around the meeting table. There was the noise of people outside. This might be Wilson and the other students, said JB.
Oh, bloody hell,
said Camo.
Not smelly students.
Play nice, Camo, said JB. The door opened, and in walked a tall, leggy young woman in her early 20s. She had long, straight black hair and a beautiful, symmetrical face, with a small nose and a thin mouth. She had that natural slender beauty of youth that would require a lot of effort to try not to lose as she moved into her 30s. She looked at the four of them staring at her. There was a faint smile on her face, and then it hardened a fraction, and she sent a critical look over the room.
"Have we got the right place?" she said dismissively over her shoulder. "The Lungsdale Fell Running Association."
Derek, Thomas and Camo looked at each other, smiled, and gave the universal men's agreement that they were in the presence of a beautiful young woman.
"That's right,"
said Camo enthusiastically, getting up, his chair scraping unacknowledged on the wooden floor.
"Are you the four students? Come in, make yourself welcome."
He gave JB a wide-eyed look and raised his eyebrows up and down. "I thought squaddies and students were natural enemies, Camo," he said quietly.
"Not when they look like bloody models," he said. "Have you seen her legs? They're never ending."
She had the flicker of a smile at Camo's fuss, and was unfazed at being suddenly in the presence of four unknown men.
"Confident girl,"
muttered Camo under his breath to JB. "Yeah, looks like it," he said.
"Is that the rest of 'em?"
said Camo at the noise outside.
"Is there four of you?"
She paused a moment before answering, not looking at him and making him wait.
"Yes," she said rather haughtily. "They're just locking up the bicycles."
"Camo!"
he said, going across to her and holding out his hand. She had one hand across her belly, and her other was propped up by the elbow on the crossed arm, and she was playing with a little silver cross on a chain around her neck. She looked at the offered hand for a moment, considering what to do. Camo still stood there. She eventually put her hand down, lots of bangles making noise as they fell down her wrist. She held the hand out for him to take, like she was a princess.
"Tonka,"
she said, glancing at him, and then back to looking around the room.
"Tonka?"
said Camo.
"I've never heard that name before. Where's it from?"
She paused again, making him wait before answering.
"It's Dutch,"
she said without enthusiasm.
"My brother Wilson and I are Dutch, but we've been in England since we were very young."
"Oh, that's amazing,"
said Camo.
"She's Dutch, everyone."
Derek and Thomas were up and went to shake her hand too. JB tagged on at the back. While they introduced themselves, the door burst open and three others came in. Two tall young men, one fair and one dark, came in energetically.
"Hello, everyone. We have arrived at last," said the dark one. "I presume we've come to the right place then?"
While everyone was distracted by all the activity, JB noticed a quiet young girl, or rather woman, bringing up the rear. There was a slow, gentle grace about her. She had a pale face and a large light blue headband covering all her hair. The other three students were loud and confident, and it was like she was not there. Not one of them, but one of their shadows. She looked over, and for a split second her eyes got locked into his, and he smiled. She was surprised and broke away from looking by putting her head lower. He was sure he caught a flicker of a smile just before her head lowered. JB had a sudden feeling of protection and of instantly liking her for some reason. He was now confronted by Tonka, as the three others, Camo, Derek and Thomas, had moved on to introduce themselves to the rest. Tonka looked at him, then followed his gaze to the other girl and back. She had a knowing, wry smile on her face. JB felt a slow wave of freezing cold travel up his spine as she put her eyes on him. The eyes were laser beams scanning him and his emotions, checking for any flaws and weaknesses. He put a forced smile on his face to protect from the scan. There was a flicker of a question on her face when he blanked her scanning, and then she covered it. She offered her hand and he went to shake it. It felt like a dead limp fish at odds with her beautiful features. He had to stop his hand recoiling away, and he masked his feeling of revulsion under her watchful eyes. "JB," he said blankly. There was a look of recognition on her face and a mild improvement of respect. Probably that I'm the one who wrote that blog, he thought. "Tonka," she said. There was a tiny positive squeeze from her cold dead hand, and then she pulled it away. JB turned to look at the rest of them and slowly walked away, trying to cover the fact that he knew he had just shaken hands with a psychopath.
"Hi, I'm Wilson,"
said the dart student, going up energetically to Camo.
"You must be Butty. You're exactly as I pictured you. Such an inspirational message. We were wondering exactly how to spend our summer, and then your message came through, loud and clear. It was surely a message direct from the good Lord himself."
"Amen,"
said Tonka behind him. Everyone glanced at Tonka, twirling the little silver cross between her fingers, and then back to Wilson.
"No, I'm not JB,"
said Camo.
"I'm Camo. That's JB." "Oh, right,"
said Wilson. He set off for JB. There were introductions all around. The other girl was keeping out of everyone's way. JB made a point of going over to her. "Hi," he said. "I think it's my fault that you're here. Sorry, I'm JB." He held out his hand, and she looked at it apprehensively. He thought for a moment she was going to refuse it, but eventually she took it. JB felt a surge of electricity, a shock at her touch. Her hand was warm, soft, welcoming, and totally different from the recoil-inducing dead touch of Tonka. The nerves in his hand fired off multiple confused signals up his arm to his brain. Her head was low, and she lifted it up for a second, and a word formed on her lips. Two shadows immediately appeared, one either side of them. One was Tonka, and the other was the fair-haired young man who had introduced himself as Keppel. The girl took her hand back from JB.
"I'm afraid she doesn't speak,"
said Tonka.
"She doesn't like to speak to strangers, or to anyone really. She will speak to us three, when no one else is there."
Tonka said it matter-of-factly, like an emotionless teacher.
"It's a proper thing," said Keppel. "It's a condition called elected mute."
The two of them edged forward, almost physically moving JB away from her. A trigger went off in JB's mind, and he did not back away. "All right," he said softly. "What's your name?" There was a moment of shock from all three of them. The girl looked up at him, and then at Tonka, confused.
"I told you, she doesn't speak," said Tonka angrily. "If you want to ask her something, just ask one of us." "Yes, just ask one of us. It's easier," said Keppel in a more friendly voice. "Her name's Betty, by the way."
"Well, nice to meet you, Betty," said JB. He stood there for a couple of seconds until she had glanced up and acknowledged him, and only then did he walk off.
"Are you okay?"
he heard Tonka say with exaggerated concern. Camo came up to him.
"What do we do now?"
he said.
"We've never had it with so many people from outside."
"They all just want to go up a mountain," said JB. "Let's make everyone a brew, and then just discuss which mountain and when."
"Great idea, JB,"
said Camo. He turned around to them all.
"Okay, everyone,"
he said loudly.
Who wants a brew? And then we'll decide which mountain we're going up and when. Hurrah for mountains!
Shouted Wilson.
That's what we're here for. Let's all go up a mountain. And down again,
shouted Camo.
And down again. Ho!
Shouted Wilson.
Ho!
Who wants what on the brews? Said JB.
Oh dear, they're bound not to have any decaf,
said Tonker.
In a place like this. You do ours, Capel. You know how we like it. I can't abide it done wrong. Yes, honey bun,
said Capel, jumping up to do it.
And make sure you do mine in the correct order,
said Tonker after him.
You always manage to mess it up somehow. No matter how many times I tell you how to do it. Don't worry, honey bun, I've got this, said Keppel in an almost baby voice. Look for decaf first. If not, then fruit teas, but definitely not chamomile. And failing that, a straight white tea, no sugar. That's right, isn't it, honey bun? Surely you should know by now, she said sourly. Don't worry, I've got it sorted, honey bun, he said.
Keppel shot past JB and started searching amongst all the tea and coffee things.
Oh God, have you no decaf?
He said over his shoulder, not looking. No, said JB, feeling his hackles rising. Just ordinary.
No fruit teas?
No fruit teas, said JB.
Oh God, ordinary tea will have to do, he said.
He took a sigh to himself.
Just ordinary tea, honey bun, unfortunately,
he shouted. There was a pause, and he waited, frozen to the spot.
OK, she said eventually. I suppose that will have to do. Don't make it like dishwater like you usually do. Remember to bring some with you next time. If we come again, that is. OK, honey bun, he said, setting into action to make drinks for the four of them. JB did everyone else's and kept out of Keppel's way. Camo came up.
Do you need a hand carrying the drinks?
He said.
I've got it, thanks,
said Keppel, carrying 4 drinks back.
Watch out, everybody. It's a bit hot, honey bun. Sorry there's no decaf. We really should have thought to bring some,
she said, not saying thank you for the drink.
I'll remember for next time, honey bun,
said Keppel apologetically. Honey bun? Whispered JB to Camo. She's no honey bun.
She's all right. She's just a bit frosty, that's all,
said Camo.
It's always the same with good-looking girls. They have to stop men pestering them all the time, so they put up a bit shield to keep them away. You just have to find your way of charming your way through it, that's all. That's half the fun of it, JB.
Yeah, said JB doubtfully.
What?
Said Camo.
Anyway, I'd rather have her than the other one. There's not much to her, is there? Quiet as a mouse, and as for her looks, well, let's be charitable and say that she's not been as lucky as her pal.
I think she's kind of sweet, said JB.
You big old softy,
said Camo. He took his drink and Derek's and headed back. Right then, said JB on the way back. What else do you fancy?
I was just describing the cowgirls, said Derek. Nice and steep, plenty of great views on the top, but lovely safe round green hills, not rocky dangerous climbs or dangerous drops. Let's do dangerous drops,
said Wilson eagerly.
Yeah, Lex, said Keppel. That's what we're here for, dangerous drops, hooray!
Tonka looked at her fingernails like she was completely disinterested.
"What do you think, honey bun?"
said Keppel. She was just about to answer.
"Oh, sister won't mind,"
said Wilson impatiently. JB watched a flash of anger go across her face. He could swear she logged it down in a revenge list somewhere in her head before letting the anger go.
"I don't mind where we go on your little summer jaunts, brother," she said. "But Keppel and I can't make midweek, can we, as you recall? We have our little excursion that I'm ever so nervous about."
She smiled, and JB thought, she's not nervous about anything. We were just supposed to ask her about it and make her the centre of attention. Tonka looked angry. No one had picked up on her hint, and she went back to pretending to be bored and looked at her nails. Can no one else see that she's a psychopath? Thought JB. Hang on, he told himself. You shouldn't make such strong, quick decisions. You can't make a judgment like that in a few seconds. He looked over at her. She sighed with boredom and looked around, decided no one was paying her any attention, so she stretched her arms over her head and arched her back. Camo, Derek and young Thomas immediately glanced at her and the presented profile of her figure. She paused the pose for a few seconds, smiled to herself, and then put her arms down, releasing them at her command. She smiled evilly to herself, and then clocked JB looking at her. She stared directly into his eyes. JB felt he was staring into someone with no soul. He smiled innocently at her and gave her a little nod and looked away. He could still feel her laser beam eyes on him. That's a psychopath, wondering if I know she's a psychopath, he thought. I'm going to have to be on my guard with her and keep my distance. The rest seem fairly normal. Oh well, they're only here for the summer. Let's make the best of it.
"Your blog really struck us in the heart," said Wilson to JB. "City life is such a drag, such a false life. We're choking in car fumes, blinded by street lights so that you can't see any stars at night. Nothing is natural anymore. It's like you said, grey concrete prison boxes and tarmac all around. We heard your call to get back to nature, back to Lady Mother Earth."
"Needed to get back to nature,"
agreed Keppel, nodding.
"Mother Nature."
"Yes, needed to,"
said Wilson enthusiastically.
"You're so right. It's a need, an ancient call, the call of the wild."
"We've signed up for folk music, basket weaving and pottery too, at the local college," said Keppel.
"Right," said JB.
"When you wrote in your blog," said Wilson to JB, "you wrote about the knowing and the not knowing. When you wrote that, I knew exactly what you meant. It really spoke a deep truth to us all, didn't it, dear Sister Tonka?"
"It really did," she agreed unenthusiastically, not taking her eyes off her nails. "Knowing and not knowing, all at the same time. Exactly. Profound." "Oh, did it?" said JB, just to be polite.
"Oh, yes, it did, JB,"
said Wilson earnestly. "Oh, good," said JB, feeling a little pleased.
"Well, what did you mean by it, exactly?"
said Wilson quizzically. JB saw Tonka stir and become interested. She was almost sniffing the air like a shark sensing blood. "Yes, what did you mean by it?" she smiled evilly. "Exactly." "Well, That'll teach you to get cocky, JB thought to himself. Well, he said, playing for time. Wilson leaned in to listen to the words with a serious face, as if he were about to hear the important teachings of a great guru. Oh, bloody hell, thought JB. I don't even remember what I wrote. What I meant exactly, he said.
Yes, exactly,
said Keppel, leaning in. This is silly, thought JB. I'll just come clean. To be honest, Wilson, he said, I don't exactly remember what I said.
That's it! Oh, profound!
Shouted Wilson, excited. It is? Said JB, confused.
You were in a trance of creation, he shouted. A moment of bliss, a moment of pure wonder. The words came out of you unconsciously, from the depth of your very soul.
JB was confused and then shrugged, happy to take the exit. I suppose it did in a way, he said.
Yes, you were speaking in tongues,
said Keppel.
like Joan of Arc.
Yes, that's it,
said Wilson.
Words direct from the great Maker.
He put his head high. Oh no, I don't know about that, said JB. Anyway, didn't they burn Joan of Arc at the stake?
Yes, they did,
said Tonker, eyeing him suspiciously, disappointed he had escaped the trap.
Yes, yes, said Camo. Now back to the actual mountains. How about the cowgirls? When are we going up there then?
Well, we can all four go up on either Saturday or Sunday, said Keppel. We can be out for a bit then and taking a few peeks.
You don't want to overdo it on the first one,
said Derek.
Oh, we'll be fine, said Wilson. We're young and we're pretty fit.
What footwear have you got? Said Derek, a little put out. It's steep and slippy on the grass at the cowgirls.
Oh, we're all right. We invested in some fell shoes, said Wilson. It's only Betty here that hasn't got hers yet. All she's got is a pair of ordinary trainers.
Betty started to go red underneath her makeup as people looked at her. They are rather expensive, said Tonker, patting Betty on the arm.
You don't want to spend the little money you have if you are only going to go up there a few times. Anyway, you might find it too hard. Very wise, very wise.
Betty looked really uncomfortable at Tonker's words, and more so with everyone looking. What size are you? Said JB. We have a few spare fell shoes in our donated spare kit box. They've been sprayed and washed, so they'd be okay.
She takes a size 6,
said Keppel, quickly speaking for her. Tonker gave Keppel a dirty look, and he looked confused. I think we might have a size 6, said JB. You can borrow those, no problem. Betty glanced at him and gave a weak smile and looked away. Tonker gave JB a dirty look, her eyes narrowing to thin slits. She was annoyed he had spoiled her fun, like a cat who had been stopped from toying with an injured mouse.
So, that's it then, we are all sorted, said Wilson. So, do we wait for the weekend and all go up together? Or are any of you free midweek to take me and Betty up for a shorter one? I wonder what we should do. I could go up Wednesday night for a quick trip up the cowgirls. That'd be ace, said Camo.
I can,
said Thomas.
Not me,
said Derek.
I'm up for one at the weekend though.
Are you all waiting for us at the weekend then? Said Tonker.
Why would she say that? Thought JB. Why would she stop Wilson and Betty going out midweek when she's not even there? He had a sudden devilish feeling. He made a decision inside. Before he could doubt himself, he hardened his resolve to see it through. "What's your opinion, Betty?" he said. Everyone was stunned that he had asked her directly in front of everyone, and he ploughed on before they could do their usual trick of butting in and speaking for her. "What do you want to do? Have a short one on Wednesday, or wait for the weekend and do a longer one straight away?" The others stirred uncomfortably at the table, and the atmosphere tensed.
"I told you she doesn't speak," said Tonker angrily.
"Well,"
said Wilson,
"not in front of strangers like this. She finds it too much."
"No," said Keppel. "She won't speak." Betty was looking down, obviously struggling with people looking. "Well," said JB in a calm and gentle voice, "that would not be fair if we never got to hear what she wanted to do. I'm sure she has her own ideas, and I'd like to hear them."
"Yes, but she doesn't like to speak," said Tonker again. "You pressing her to do it in front of everyone is a cruel and heartless thing to do."
The anger had dropped from Tonker's face, and the smile she had was at odds with her supposed annoyed words. She had realised that either JB or Betty, or even better, both of them, were going to be humiliated, and she was sure to take her pleasure either way. "Well, I'm committed now," thought JB. "Well, that's not what I think," he said calmly. "I think everyone has opinions, and everyone wants to be heard. It's just some people find it easier to speak than others, that's all."
"She won't speak, I'm telling you,"
said Tonker, quietly delighted. They all moved about uncomfortably in their chairs, except for Tonker, who sat back at her pleasure to watch the situation unfold. She had her legs crossed, and the top leg was bouncing up and down, showing her enjoyment. "I don't mind," said JB coldly. "I can wait." He ignored them all and put his attention on Betty. She was looking down, her face flushed.
"I can ask her privately, if you like,"
said Wilson. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw Tonker shoot Wilson an evil look, but JB kept his eyes on Betty. "No," he said calmly. "She's okay." It was silent for a few seconds that started to stretch out to eternity. JB's senses were heightened. He sensed Camo to one side shift uncomfortably in his seat. Tonker's leg bobbed up and down faster, like a dog happily wagging its tail. For her this was JB and Betty being skewered in one great stroke. "Well," he thought to himself, "how is this going to play out? Just keep your nerve and see it through." He focused everything on Betty. She was red in the face, playing with her fingers in her lap, and obviously very uncomfortable. She glanced up a few times at him, her eyes pleading with him to stop. He kept a gentle smile and refused to let her go. He locked her eyes with his and tried to give her the strength and confidence to speak through sheer will. After moments of agony, she stopped fidgeting and relaxed. He could feel her about to speak, and he heard a disturbing cough. The girl's cough. It was Tonker, trying to sabotage her at the last. He saw Betty falter, and he thought he would never forgive Tonker for what she had just done. But Betty gathered her strength. The cough had actually helped and convinced her. "I think," she said. She hesitated as the people in the room stopped breathing and sat a little forward in their chairs, shocked. Not just that she had spoke, but the surprise of her voice. It was breathy and husky and sexy. "Yes," said JB, locking his eyes with hers to concentrate for her support. "I think," she said, starting again. There was utter silence, everyone willing her on. "If you don't mind, that is, that it would be best if me and Wilson go with you on the shorter route on Wednesday to see how that goes, and then, if that's okay, we can all do the longer one together on the Sunday." "Yes, I think that's the perfect solution," said JB. Her voice was a complete surprise. It was so husky it broke towards the end of a sentence. Everyone was suddenly speaking, relieved, and so happy for her.
"Good for you, Betty,"
said Camo.
"Great idea, Betty,"
said Derek.
"Well, I never,"
said Keppel.
"That's a surprise."
Everyone was pleased for her. Everyone except one.
"Well, what a surprise, she does speak,"
said Tonka.
"I still don't think it was right for you to force her to do it like that, though."
Tonka's try at a negative reaction to it was completely lost in the happy atmosphere. Betty still sat there, hands on her lap, trying to be invisible, but she had a little smile and an obvious happy glow.
"Are you okay?"
said Wilson, leaning forward privately to her. She gave a little nod and glanced down, but did not lower her head this time.
"Of course she's okay,"
said Camo loudly.
"She did really well for herself then. Good on you, Betty."
She looked up and gave Camo a little smile. What day is best?" said JB. "Tuesday or Wednesday?"
"I don't mind either,"
said Wilson. "Up to you to pick the day then, Betty," said JB. "After all, it was your idea." Everyone looked at her, wondering if she would go back into herself, if he had indeed pushed her too hard. "Wednesday," she said, "if that's okay." "Wednesday it is then," said JB. She smiled at him and put her head down shyly.
Well, 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 I never would have believed it, unless I would have seen it for myself.
said Tonka.
And full sentences too.
"Well, this is new,"
said Wilson.
"It's been years since I've seen her talk like that. What made you suddenly do it?" "Don't crowd her,"
said Camo.
"Give the girl a chance to breathe." "I am her boyfriend,"
said Wilson.
"We've known her for years,"
said Capel. "Well," said JB, "I think we've got ourselves a star. A little superstar." Tonka sat with a stern face, her leg bobbing up and down more rapidly than before. She was obviously brooding on what this new development meant. 1 minute she had 2 victims with their feet into the fire, and the next they had escaped her clutches, and even more come up smelling of roses. Keppel leaned in to speak to her, and she shooed him angrily away. He sat back in his chair, confused at the reason for her sudden annoyance. Wilson leaned forward to Betty and spoke to her quietly. Camo leaned into JB.
"You took a chance then, JB,"
he whispered.
"How did you know she was going to speak?"
JB looked at him and shrugged. "I didn't," he said.
"Crikey,"
said Camo. "Yeah," he said. "It could have gone either way. But I'm glad I did it."
"What a voice she has,"
said Camo.
Why would you hide a voice like that? It was like little fingers tickling up and down my spine, it was. Still, she's no looker like her mate. Calling her a superstar, that's laying it on a bit thick, isn't it? The other one has got a mouth on her, but she'll be better on the fells. She's got the thin figure for it. If either of them is going to be a fell runner, it's probably her.
I'm not on about fell running, said JB. None of these are fell runners. You heard what they said. They're only here for a month and a bit of fun, and then they're off. Somehow, I think she's going to surprise us all. There's just something about her. Camo straightened up and turned to Wilson.
So, what fell shoes did you get then?
He said.
Oh, we all three bought something different, haha. He laughed. I don't know what they're called.
Wilson's are a hideous lime green, if that helps,
said Tonka.
Mine are a pretty electric blue.
Doesn't narrow it down,
said Derek, who obviously liked his gear as much, if not more than Camo.
We have them in our bike satchels, said Wilson. Do you want us to bring them in so you can see? That'd be a good idea,
said Camo.
OK,
said Wilson, getting up. Keppel went to get up too to get his.
Get mine, will you?
said Tonka.
OK, honey bun,
said Keppel, hurrying out.
Oh, hang on,
said Tonka, getting up.
I don't want you looking through my things, I'll do it myself.
As Tonka got up, one of the bangles she had at her wrist that she'd been playing with dropped and rolled on the floor, going under a cupboard. It happened in front of Betty, and she got up to go and get it. She was so quiet and unobtrusive, Derek, Camo and Thomas hardly noticed her get up, but she was directly opposite JB, and he watched her. The bottom of the cupboard was probably just over a foot off the ground, and there was a long gap. JB thought she was going to have to lie flat on the floor and crawl a bit and reach with one arm under. When she got to the cupboard, though, she did not immediately go on the floor and reach under. She stopped and sat on her calves, upright with a straight back facing it. It looked more like she was about to pray or do yoga. It was a kind of a strange seating position. Is she trying to figure out how to do it without getting dirty? Thought JB. I wonder if she's regretting going to get it. Anyway, she needs to be further back than that, though, to get under. She's way too close. It's like she doesn't know how to do it. Then Betty did a strange and unexpected thing. She slid herself forward under the cupboard with her arms out flat, like she was diving into a pool. JB sensed the other three sets of eyes turn and follow this strange movement. A number of thought processes sparked simultaneously in JB's mind, and to do so, time conveniently slowed. The simple physics of it was that as she dived forward, her bum came up off her legs and rose upright until her legs performed a right angle at her knees. To get her head and arms under the table, her body dipped lower and lower into a steep curve, and he thought her back must surely snap, but it bent lower and lower, curving more and more. The move left her bottom up in the air. He had the time to think to himself, why doesn't she just lower her bum? It would make more sense, and he had the time to curse himself at the thought and to feel guilty at the curse. The contortion of the body was a physical impossibility, her bottom straight up in the air, and meanwhile her head and arms were out of sight under the table. The greatest physical mystery was to believe beforehand that the body could achieve such a position ahead of time, and so even attempt it. Such was the physics of the move, but the physics was nothing. With every movement forward into the final position, her figure became more and more exposed, and more feminine. The bend of her back was something only a girl could do, and was as effortless as the bend of a snake. Her plump round bottom rose up like the rising of the sun, spreading light and life-giving joy. Everywhere there were curves, sending the eye whizzing to the point of dizziness. J.B. watched the unfolding of the contortion and the dip of her back go way beyond what he thought was humanly possible, and then beyond and beyond again. But there was another transformation, and yet again another, all at the same time. J.B. glanced back at the others to break the spell, and to check with them if what was happening was actually happening. They did not waste their eyes on him, their faces full of wonder and a thirst. He looked back guiltily, yet he did look, and immediately he was confronted by a display of pure, plump, perfect femininity in all its curves. It was indelicate to look at a woman you barely knew in such a position and unaware of it, yet it was impossible not to look. Her head and arms searching underneath made her bottom sway and jiggle until it was almost unbearable. He looked at the cupboard end of her, and his eyes followed the great drop curve of her back. Her shirt was pulled tight, and he could see a narrow channel run down her back, and 2 lines of muscle running down to her lower back. Her back narrowed to a waist so thin he thought he might be able to put his hands around it and touch his fingers together. The curves that had all come into the narrow waist then exploded out suddenly wide and back around viciously, taking the eye. The nearest comparison indeed the waist of a wasp. In comparison to the narrowness of her waist, her bottom seemed too big, too plump to hold and control by that narrow waist. It was both soft and round and luscious, and yet at the same time as powerful as a horse that could back kick you into next Tuesday. Her legs were close together, but they did not touch, and there was an intriguing gap that ran between them. The indecorous position she had assumed made it obvious that she was no porcelain doll, but a woman, and as such an animal, and it made an animal of you, the onlooker. It was impossible not to wish for, at the very least, a short time together, alone. Partly he wanted it to be over and free, and another part wanted it to last forever. When she stopped still, and he knew she had grasped a long-forgotten bangle, and a moment later she was pulling herself back out snake-like. The mad display was not quite over yet. She slid herself out backwards, while keeping her legs and bottom still vertical, rather than the seemingly easier method of just sitting her bottom down. For a moment her top half virtually disappeared behind her lower half, giving a moment of peak bottom, as it was held aloft mid-air, a thing alone. As she sat back down into the yoga position, all the curves started to disappear, and they were gradually released from their tunnel vision, to see again the whole room. The first thing to start to change back were the lights, from a reddish hue to yellow. The noise changed from silence to an awakening noise of breathing. Someone let out a little moan. There was some movement, then the noise of cars and birds on the street outside. Normal noises. Had it been silence? Thought J.B., trying to remember. Or was there a kind of constant vibration? A constant buzzing? He could not remember. It was gone. Betty looked at the bangle in her hand for a moment, and then she got up and turned to sit down. She had a blank face, unaware of what had transpired, and found them all staring at her. She looked down at her front covered in dust, thinking it was that. She frowned and looked at J.B. with an unspoken question. The bathroom's at the back there, he said. She put the bangle down on the table in front of where Tonka had sat and walked off to the bathroom, brushing her front. No one spoke. Camo looked back and waited until the door had closed behind her.
"Oh my God!" said Camo. "Did that just happen? Did I really see what I thought I saw?"
"I think you did," said Derek, shaking his head.
"I think I did."
Derek, Camo and Thomas all looked at each other and let out noises of surprise and delight. Camo playfully punched young Thomas on the upper arm.
What about that then, young un? Did you see it?
I sure did, he said. I don't know how she got under there like that. 1 minute she was sat there, and then the next she was taking a dive.
She was just sat there like the Sphinx in the desert, said Camo. They're built different, aren't they? Caw, how bendy was she? And those curves! Did you ever see such a thing? She had more curves on her than a Formula 1 racetrack. I was dizzy from just looking at her.
Camo wobbled himself about, and they all laughed.
Did you feel dizzy inside, young un?
He said, prodding Thomas.
Now, that's a woman, that is.
A bit dizzy,
he said, shyly. Well, said JB to Camo, still think she's plain? Camo smiled at the memory and his sudden change of heart quite happily.
I think I'm in love,
he said. Everyone laughed again.
How long was she actually under there for? Said Derek. Time seemed to stand still.
Everyone laughed again.
A couple of minutes,
said young Thomas seriously. Everyone looked at him, and Camo laughed and gave him a shove.
A couple of minutes? Crikey, Cupid hit you hard, didn't
he said.
It would only be a few seconds. I think you're right, JB. She is a superstar. She could be the perfect girlfriend. A figure like that, and she doesn't speak.
JB was beginning to feel a little uneasy at the way they were all talking about her. It was obvious boys would be boys and enjoy a figure like that, but still, he thought he should steer the conversation, particularly for young Thomas. We should be respectful, though, he said. She had no idea.
We are being respectful, JB, said Camo. My respect for her has risen a lot, I can tell you.
Derek and Thomas laughed. JB tried again.
The thing I can't figure out, he said, is why she did it that way. You know, the contortion diving under thing. Why didn't she do it like everyone else would just do? You know, by going sideways and then on your belly and crawl forward.
Camo looked at him incredulously.
Why? Are you complaining?
Derek and Thomas laughed again. No, I'm not complaining, said JB.
Crikey, said Camo. She had her clothes on the whole time, but I think that's the sexiest thing I've ever seen in my life. The missus is certainly going to get the benefit tonight, that's for sure.
He shoved Thomas, who grinned. So much for steering the conversation, thought JB.
Crikey, said Camo again. That figure, though. Michelangelo couldn't top that, could he? You can take all your great works of art, and I'll take looking at that any day of the week.
They carried on joking and ribbing each other, and JB thought over what Camo had said. That was the other thing he had felt that he could not put into words. Camo was right about it being like a work of art. He could not make full sense of it. He knew the feeling clearly, but every time he tried to put it in words, it slipped away elusively. The greatest sculptors of the world, the greatest painters, had tried to capture the perfect goddess, and she had defeated all of their efforts in an impromptu moment. He thought Plato had speculated on perfect shapes, perfect triangles, perfect squares. He had said that a perfect triangle could not live in reality, but there might be one in a kind of heaven, that there is one in the imagination that we know is perfect, and we can compare all other triangles to it. So what was a goddess, a perfect woman? What was young Thomas thinking now? Was he comparing what he had seen to the perfect goddess he had held in his mind? JB did not think so. He speculated that what Thomas had just seen was beyond what he had been able to imagine. There had not been a goddess there before, but there was one now, and yet, at the same time, she was just an ordinary girl. And then there was Tonka, who he had to admit was beautiful. But if she was a goddess, it was Medusa.
"What's up, JB?" said Camo, teasing. "You look lost in your thoughts. Having a little memory to recall by any chance?"
JB smiled and glanced at Thomas. "In a respectful way," he said.
Of course,
said Camo. The laughter had died down, and JB saw their faces go blank as they slipped away into a recent memory of their own that they were powerless to resist. "It's like the air is filled with hormones and pheromones from the young students at the peak of their mating physicality, and they're all drunk and giddy on them," thought JB. "You're going to have to be detached, calm and professional. Make yourself cool to it inside. Someone has to do it, otherwise this could all get a bit silly." The students came back into the room noisily with their fell shoes.
"Oh, you've got robotica white stripes," said Camo to Wilson. "And you've got the new Midori's, Tonka. I should have guessed when you said electric blue. If they are a good fit, they'll do you all right, those will." "Thank heavens," said Wilson. "They're not cheap, are they?"
While they were all talking, Betty came quietly back in and sat down, trying to do it without drawing any attention to herself. But she got new looks and smiles from Camo, Derek and Thomas, and she had a little quizzical frown, wondering why the change and her little rise in status. JB saw the hawk's eyes of Tonka spot the change, and her eyes narrowed, trying to figure out what had happened, sure that she was unhappy about it, whatever it was. She looked across at JB and sent her laser beam scan at him, and he smiled and kept his face blank, and she moved on to something else that she was unhappy about. Yeah, thought JB. Definite psychopath. While they were all chatting, he went to the box of spur gear that they had collected and found the part-worn pair of size 6 fell shoes. He took them over to Betty. "Here," he said. "Try these on and see what you think. You don't have to have them if you don't want." She blushed, but she took them and took her own shoes off and put the fell shoes on. He waited nearby to take them back if they did not fit. She stretched her feet in them when they were on. "Okay?" he asked. Everyone was quietly watching out of the corner of their eye. Tonka was watching, ready to pounce on any mistake JB made. She nodded, wanting the attention to be over. "I'd have a little walk in them, just to be sure," he said. "You don't want them rubbing." She looked around, hesitated, but then got up and went for a little walk and back. "All right?" said JB. She nodded. "Thanks," she said quietly. There was a little change in the atmosphere, everyone quietly pleased at her speaking. "Great," said JB. "Keep them as long as you like. It's good that someone gets use out of them." She sat back down and tried to disappear again, but there was the faintest smile on her lips. Tonka was looking at her, obviously unhappy with this unexpected turn of events.
"Right, well, how are we going to arrange to meet at the Cowgirls then?" said Camo happily. "I don't mind driving."
"We'll need the car that day, brother," said Tonka. "For that event I'm nervous about."
"Yes," said Wilson. "Sorry, could someone give me and Betty a lift?" "Sure," said Camo. "I can pick you up, no problem."
There'll be 5 of us," said JB to Camo. "Me, you, Thomas, Wilson and Betty. Do you think we could get in one car, or do you think we'll need to take 2?
"You should only take one,"
said Tonka.
"You should think of the environmental impact of taking 2 cars when you don't need to. You should try to limit your carbon footprint."
Tonka said it like she was reprimanding them already, before they had even done anything.
Are you an environmentalist?
Said Camo warily.
I certainly am,
Said Tonka.
and a vegan, a feminist, and a communist. I always put animals and the poor ahead of myself. Don't I, Capel?
Yes, you do, Honeybun.
Oh,
Said Camo, giving JB a wary glance.
and a Christian first, sister,
Said Wilson.
Of course, brother, she said. A Christian first. All good Christians should be environmentalists, vegans, feminists, and communists.
A likely story, thought JB. Those are just weapons for you to torment people with. It was quiet for a moment while they weighed it up. Tonka smiled at being the centre of attention and causing issues. Every time she speaks it's to cause trouble, thought JB. Can no one else see? Her words are little drops of poison. She doesn't go for the full hand grenade. That'd be too obvious. Just little drips of poison. I'm a feminist too, said Keppel. Everyone looked at him. Tonka gave him an exasperated look, annoyed he had shifted the attention from her.
I am,
he said, with everyone looking at him.
Well,
sighed Camo.
on that note, anyone want another brew?
Oh, great, said Wilson.
We'll help.
Wilson spoke quietly to Betty, and she got up to go and help make them, taking the 4 students' mugs. Camo looked across at JB and gave him a look to go do it, like he would not know what to do with the elected mute girl. OK, my turn again, smiled JB. He walked over to where Betty was washing the 4 mugs. She had already filled the kettle and switched it on. He waited for a turn at the sink behind her. She glanced back at him. He smiled but did not speak. While he washed his 4 mugs, she got their drinks ready. She waited a little off to the side, not looking at him. He turned to get the 4 drinks sorted. Betty glanced back at the group to see if anyone was watching, and then turned to him. Why did you make me speak? She said, her voice doing the sexy breaking thing. She said it in a curious rather than an angry way. I didn't think I made you speak, he said. I offered you the chance to speak, and you decided to take it, is my view of what happened. She stood there thinking it over while he poured his 4 drinks and moved the milk a little nearer for her to use. He was ready to walk back with them, and she looked at him. Thanks, she said. It was only for a moment, but it was her turn to hold his eyes. He smiled and nodded, trying to make as little of it as possible. After dropping the teas and coffees back on the table, JB went to the spare kit box and got out a pair of good socks. He went over to Betty and passed them to her. I'd wear these on Wednesday with those fell shoes, he said. It might be an idea to wear them around the house a little bit as well, just to wear them in and get them to fit your feet. He turned immediately so that she didn't have to answer and went to sit back down. He did not look at her either, but went to his drink. Before it got to 9, the students asked if it was okay if they left a little earlier, as they had to get back on their bikes. They were staying in the grounds of a university lecturer in caravans on his land. It was a cheap way to spend the summer. The 4 of them were waiting at the door while Wilson gave a little enthusiastic speech.
This is fantastic, truly amazing, he said. I had heard it was friendly in the north, but you have been so true to it. It's, well, as I say, amazing. And I can't wait to see those amazing fells I've heard so much about. Can we, everyone?
Keppel and Tonka gave little positive noises. They were about to go, but Betty was still facing the room, and everyone hesitated, surprised. She was really focused, and took a half step forward. "Thank you for the shoes and the socks," she said, looking at JB and then glancing at the others. "And for making us welcome." It was silent for an awkward second. Wilson smiled and looked at her, surprised but proud. Tonka was surprised and horrified.
"Oh, you're very welcome, darling,"
said Camo.
"Yes, welcome,"
said Derek. Thomas was too shy to speak. JB smiled and nodded, and the students shuffled out of the door.
"Goodbye for now, and see you Wednesday,"
said Wilson, the last out. The four of them looked at each other and waited for a few long seconds until they thought that the students would be gone and on their way. The four of them looked at each other, waited for a few seconds until they thought they would be on their way, unable to hear.
"Well, I never,"
said Camo.
"What an eventful evening. I don't mind saying, those students aren't too bad. That Tonka's a bit frosty-like, but you expect that from a girl that looks like her. The biggest surprise of the night, though, was that Butty." "In all my years,"
said Derek,
"I've never seen such a transformation like that. From refusing to speak at all to making a speech at the door. That was amazing to see." "Oh, yeah,"
said Camo.
"Melts your heart to see that. I must admit, we did really well with her, I'll say that. It's the atmosphere in the club, see? Even these southerny posh students said so. And what about her sliding under that table? I've seen some beautiful sights in my time, but I think that tops the lot. That was the 8th wonder of the world, that was."
Camo tried arching his back like Betty did while sat in his chair.
"Gore, how did she do that? I think I'll break me back if I go any lower."
I'll give it a go and see if I can do it,
said Thomas, about to get up and go to the cupboard.
"Oh no, don't do that, Thomas,"
said Camo forcefully.
"I want to keep my memory of her pure and intact. I don't want your backside coming into focus when I'm trying to bring the memory of it back now, do I?"
Camo, Derek and Thomas all laughed to themselves. They were giddy with that excess of pheromones in the room. JB sat there thinking of a different memory, the look of horror and annoyance on Tonka's face when Betty was confident enough to speak to them all. "She's going to make someone pay for that," he thought to himself. "And it'll probably be me."